The forest knew him as Fenrir, the Silver Terror, the beast whose howl could freeze the very sap in the trees. He was not a creature of moon-cursed fate but of ancient, brutal lineage, a true-born werewolf, king of the shadowed pines. His law was iron, his mercy non-existent. He ruled with claw and fang, and the surrounding villages paid their tribute in silence and fear, leaving offerings of game at the forest's edge to appease the monster they never wished to see. Elara was the village baker's daughter, a girl woven from sunlight and flower dust. Her world was warm ovens, the sweetness of honey, and the gentle rhythms of a simple life. But she carried a quiet sorrow, a feeling of being a songbird in a gilded cage, singing a tune that no one else could hear. She often strayed closer to the woods than others dared, drawn by a strange, melancholic pull she could not name. One evening, a noble's son, arrogant and hunting for trophies, tracked a magnificent stag too deep into Fenrir's domain. In his recklessness, his arrow went astray, grazing Elara's arm as she gathered herbs at the tree line. The shock of pain was nothing compared to the terror that followed. From the deepening shadows, a low growl vibrated through the earth. The noble's son fled, his courage evaporating. But Elara, frozen, could only watch as a wolf of impossible size emerged. His fur was the color of winter moonlight, and his eyes were twin pools of molten gold, holding the ancient cold of a starless night. This was Fenrir. He should have killed her. A human, bleeding in his territory, was a stain to be erased. He advanced, a mountain of muscle and lethal intent, his breath a cloud of frost in the warm air. He towered over her, his jaws capable of snapping bone with a whisper. But as his shadow fell upon her, something seismic shifted within him. A scent, buried beneath the sharp tang of her blood and the fragrance of wild thyme, ambrosia and wildfire. It was a melody his soul had been howling for since the dawn of his existence. Mate. The word was a thunderclap in his own mind, a primal law that superseded all others. Elara, expecting death, looked into those terrifying golden eyes and saw not malice, but a storm of confusion, rage, and something else, something like awe. He did not strike. Instead, he nudged her wounded arm with a cold nose, a gesture so at odds with his fearsome presence that her fear momentarily stilled. Without a word, he shifted. The wolf melted away, and in its place stood a man just as formidable. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked black hair and the same piercing, predatory eyes. His voice was a gravelled rumble. "You are hurt." He carried her not to her village, but deep into the heart of his territory, to a castle carved from living rock and ancient timber, a place of stark beauty and terrifying isolation. He laid her on furs before a great fireplace and tended to her wound himself, his touch surprisingly deft. Elara was a prisoner, yet she was treated not as a captive, but as a revered, bewildering guest. Fenrir was an impossible paradox. He could be discussing the philosophies of the stars with a terrifying intellect one moment, and the next, his head would snap up, a low growl in his throat at some distant threat only he could perceive. He was ruthless with a poacher he caught the next day, his justice swift and brutal. Yet with her, he was careful. He brought her jewels plucked from dragons' hoards, rare blossoms that bloomed only under starlight, the finest silks. She thanked him but remained untouched. "You cannot win me with treasures torn from the world," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You only know how to take." Her words carved a wound deeper than any blade could. He, who had never needed anything but his own strength, was at a loss. The change came slowly. He began to ask for the things he wanted. He would bring her a branch of silverberries and wait for her to accept it, rather than placing it in her hands. He started to tell her stories of his kind, of the constellations they worshipped, of the deep, lonely magic of the forest. He began to learn her world, the simple joy of bread fresh from the oven, the taste of sun-ripened berries, the comfort of a shared silence that wasn't filled with fear. Perhaps, he was not the monster she feared. He has a heart, a warm beating one at that. With the passing of day and time, something about her changed. Elara's journey into the heart of the beast was not one of sudden capitulation, but a slow, reluctant unraveling, like sunlight patiently melting a glacier. It began, as all things did in that stone castle, with fear. He was a monster, a silhouette of claws and shadows. His voice was a growl that vibrated in her bones. She ate the food he provided out of necessity, slept on the furs he gave her out of exhaustion, and answered his questions in monosyllables, a songbird who had vowed never to sing for her captor. The first thread unraveled with curiosity. It was in the contradictions. He could disembowel a trespassing troll with terrifying efficiency, yet he handled a rare, fragile moonblossom as if it were made of glass. He ruled a kingdom of predators with absolute authority, but she once saw him sit for an hour, perfectly still, as a lost fox kit sniffed at his boot before darting away. She began to notice the library. Scrolls on celestial alignments, leather-bound books of poetry in dead languages, intricate star charts carved into obsidian tablets. This was not the den of a mindless beast. It was the repository of an ancient, intelligent mind. The turning point was understanding. One night, a bitter wind howled outside, and she found him staring into the great fireplace, his profile etched in gold and shadow. He spoke, not to her, but to the flames, of a time centuries past when a human village had betrayed his trust, poisoning a pack of his wolves. The story was not a threat to her, it was an explanation. His ruthlessness was a scar tissue grown over a deep, old wound. For the first time, she didn't see a monster justifying his cruelty, but a king burdened by the weight of protecting his own. Finally, there was acceptance. He began to share his world not as a display of power, but as an offering. He showed her the meadow where the star-fed deer grazed, not to hunt them, but to watch their silent ballet under the moon. He explained the language of the forest, how the different bird calls signaled danger, or peace, or the change of seasons. He was trying to give her the keys to his kingdom, to make her feel less like a prisoner and more like a participant. She saw the loneliness in him, a deep, ancient solitude that his power and ferocity could never fill. He had been waiting, though he never knew it, for someone who would not just fear his shadow, but stand beside him in the sunlight. The moment she truly fell was quiet. He had brought her a simple, sun-warmed apple from a tree on the village border, a peace offering for a past transgression, acknowledgement of the world she missed. He didn't speak. He just held it out, his fierce golden eyes watching her, waiting for her judgment. And Elara, the baker's daughter who loved warmth and simplicity, took the apple. Then, she took his hand, the hand that could shred steel, now held gently in hers. She didn't say, "I love you." Instead, she gave him the gift he truly needed. "You are not alone anymore," she whispered. And in those words, the last of her resistance melted away. She wasn't in love with a monster or a king. She was in love with Fenrir, the warrior, the scholar, the lonely soul who had carved out a place for her in his ruthless world and, in doing so, had taught her how to be fearless. Her love was not a surrender, but a choice, and it made her more powerful than she had ever been. One night, a rival alpha, a monstrous beast from the northern mountains, challenged Fenrir, scenting a weakness in his obsession with a human. Of all the alphas who challenged Fenrir's rule, none were as cunning, cruel, or patient as Kale, the obsidian maw. Kale was not from the neighboring mountains. He was from a blighted land where the trees were petrified skeletons and the rivers ran with acid. He was a werewolf of pure spite, his fur the matte black of a starless void, his eyes the color of blood at the bottom of a well. He did not seek territory for hunting or pack. He sought to extinguish light simply because it existed, and Fenrir's domain, rich with life and ancient magic, was the brightest light of all. For decades, Kale tested the borders. He would send his corrupted wolves to poison streams, slaughter deer for sport, and whisper nightmares to the villagers, hoping to make them break their pact with the Silver Terror. But Fenrir's power was absolute, his vigilance unending. Each incursion was met with swift, brutal retaliation. Kale watched and seethed from the shadows, waiting for a crack in the king's armor. The crack, when it came, was in form of a beautiful peasant human girl named Elara. Kale saw the human girl not as a person, but as a symbol. He saw how Fenrir, the untouchable king, began to linger at the forest's edge. He saw the ruthless gleam in those golden eyes soften when they fell upon her. To Kale, this was not love, it was a fatal flaw. The mighty Silver Terror had grown a heart, and a heart was something that could be ripped out. Kale swore to make Fenrir pay, and this time, he didn't plan to lose. The hatred that festered in Kale's heart, turning it to a lump of cold obsidian, was not born of a simple territorial dispute or a lost challenge. It was a poison brewed from a deep, personal wound inflicted generations ago, a story of two brothers and a crown that was never meant to be his. Long before he was the Obsidian Maw, Kale was the second son of the previous Alpha, a mighty wolf named Borin. Fenrir and Kale were not rivals by bloodline, but by litter. They were brothers. Where Fenrir was born under a full moon, his fur already hinting at the legendary silver of their lineage, Kale was born under a new moon, his coat a stark, unremarkable black. Fenrir was strength and certainty, Kale was shadow and cunning. Their father loved them both, but the ancient laws of their kind were clear. The Alpha crown passed to the strongest. The ritual of succession was not a battle to the death, but a trial by spirit. The brothers were to journey to the Heartstone, a monolith at the center of the forest that pulsed with the land's life force, and whoever the stone deemed most worthy would be infused with its power. Fenrir, noble and direct, ran a straight path. He fought off challengers, navigated treacherous ravines, and reached the stone through sheer force of will. He placed his paw upon it, and the stone glowed with a soft, silver light, accepting him. Kale, however, took a different path. He believed the stone did not test strength, but ambition. He sought not to prove his worth to the land, but to dominate it. He found a forgotten blighted corner of the forest where a meteor of dark iron had fallen centuries before, poisoning the earth. There, he bathed in its corrosive energy, letting it seep into his bones. He believed that by merging his spirit with this raw, destructive power, he would become something new, something greater than the Heartstone itself. When he finally reached the monolith, he did not place his paw upon it gently. He slammed his corrupted claw into its surface, demanding its power. The stone recoiled. A shockwave of pure, rejecting energy threw him back. The Heartstone, the soul of the forest, saw not a leader in Kale, but a defiler. It saw the blight he had welcomed into himself, and found him unworthy. The silver light that had greeted Fenrir turned to a searing, white-hot radiance that burned Kale's eyes and scarred his spirit. From the ground, humiliated and in agony, Kale watched as Fenrir, bathed in the stone's approving light, was crowned Alpha by their father. The look on Borin's face was not one of disappointment for Kale, but of heartbreak. He saw the corruption in his youngest son and knew it was self-inflicted. In that moment, Kale's cunning twisted into paranoia, his ambition into spite. He didn't see his own failure. He saw a conspiracy. He believed the Heartstone was flawed, that his father was weak for adhering to old magic, and that Fenrir was a mere pawn who had won a crown through blind obedience, not true strength. He was banished, not by Fenrir, but by his own father, for the corruption he carried was a contagion that threatened the entire pack. As he was driven into the wasted lands, the searing rejection of the Heartstone festered in his soul, merging with the metallic blight of the meteorite. His fur turned the matte black of a scab over a wound that would never heal. His eyes turned the color of clotted blood. He became the Obsidian Maw, and he built a kingdom of spite in the blighted lands, nurturing his hatred for decades. Every report of Fenrir's just rule, every whisper of the forest's prosperity under the Silver Terror, was like a needle driven deeper into his heart. Fenrir did not hate Kale. He grieved for the brother he lost. But to Kale, Fenrir was not a brother. He was the embodiment of everything he had been denied: the approval of the land, the love of his father, the legitimacy of the crown. Fenrir's very existence was a constant reminder of his own rejection. He didn't just want to defeat Fenrir. He wanted to prove the Heartstone wrong. He wanted to defile the sacred groves, poison the life force, and take the crown not through a trial of spirit, but by force. And then, he wanted to place his corrupted paw upon the Heartstone and shatter it into a million pieces, finally silencing the ancient magic that had once dared to call him unworthy. His war wasn't for territory. It was for vindication. And the ruthless, beloved king who stood in his way was the living symbol of the injustice he had nurtured in his soul for 100 years. Now, Kale would strike, and he would make sure it hits home. The first true blow was subtle. A blight fell upon the village's crops. Not a natural rot, but a black, creeping fungus that smelled of Kale's wasted homeland. The villagers, in their fear, began to murmur. Their offerings to Fenrir grew scarce. Some whispered that the Wolf King's protection was failing, that his attention was elsewhere. Fenrir knew the source. The stench of Kale was all over it. A cold, familiar rage settled in him. He prepared for war. But as he stood before a map carved into a great stone table, Elara placed a hand on his arm. "He wants you to come to him," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the torch-lit chamber. "He wants you angry and far from home. This is a trap." Fenrir looked down at her, at the human intuition that saw patterns his brute strength often overlooked. She was right. To chase Kale into his blighted lands would be to fight on his terms, in a place stripped of life and magic. So Fenrir did the thing that was anathema to his nature. He waited. He fortified. He had his wolves patrol in tighter formations, with Elara always at the center of their protective circle. This defensive posture, however, was seen as weakness by Kale. The obsidian maw's taunts grew louder. His corrupted wolves would howl from the ridges, their voices a discordant screech that spoke of defilement and decay. They left the mangled bodies of Fenrir's scouts on the border, not just killed, but desecrated. The final provocation came on a night of the new moon, the sky a blanket of utter blackness. Kale himself crept to the very gates of Fenrir's stone castle. He did not try to enter. Instead, he left a single item hanging from a thorny branch at the entrance. It was a collar, woven from wolfsbane and cold iron, sized for a human neck. When Fenrir found it the next morning, a silence fell over the entire forest. The birds stopped singing. The wind held its breath. The rage that emanated from the Alpha was not hot, but a cold, absolute zero that promised annihilation. The protective, loving part of him that Elara had nurtured was submerged beneath the glacial fury of the primordial predator. Kale had not just threatened his mate, he had threatened the very concept of his bond, the most sacred tenet of his being. "No," Elara said firmly, stepping into his path as he prepared to charge out alone. "This is what he wants. You, alone and consumed by rage." "He has spoken your name," Fenrir growled, the sound like continents grinding together. "There is no law, no strategy, that follows that." "Then we answer together," she insisted, her own fear mastered by a fiercer resolve. "You are not the Silver Terror alone anymore. You are my king. And I am your queen. We face our enemies together." Her words did not calm his rage, but they channeled it. They gave it a purpose beyond mere destruction. He saw not a weakness in her presence, but a strength he lacked. They set the trap within the trap. Fenrir let a rumor slip through the forest, that the Alpha, mad with grief and rage, had exiled his human mate for her own safety, sending her to a hidden sacred grove with only a minimal guard. It was a lie Kale, who understood possession but not love, was certain to believe. As predicted, Kale took the bait. He bypassed the castle entirely, slinking toward the grove, his form a patch of moving darkness. He found Elara there, standing alone in a circle of moonlight, seemingly vulnerable. He emerged from the trees, a monstrous shape of shadow and sharp edges. "The king has discarded you," Kale hissed, his voice like sand grinding on stone. "A precious thing like you should be kept safe. In a box. In the dark." Elara did not flinch. She stood her ground, a simple baker's daughter facing a demigod of malice. "He did not discard me," she said, her voice ringing clear. "He sent me to lure a rat into the open." From the surrounding trees, Fenrir's entire pack emerged, not in wolf form, but in their powerful human forms, armed with silver-tipped spears and bows. They formed an impassable circle. But Kale just laughed, a horrible, scraping sound. "You think numbers matter to me, little king? I came for the heart. I will still take it from your chest." He launched himself not at the guards, but straight at Elara, a black dagger of hatred. He never reached her. A silver streak, moving faster than thought, intercepted him. Fenrir in his true wolf form, no longer coldly furious, but incandescent with a protective wrath that was pure and terrifying. This was not a battle for territory or pride. It was a battle for the soul of his world. They clashed in the center of the grove, a maelstrom of silver and obsidian. Kale fought with dirty tricks, trying to throw dirt in Fenrir's eyes, aiming for old wounds. But Fenrir fought with the clean, devastating efficiency of something that had everything to lose. Every snap of his jaws was for Elara. Every slash of his claws was for their future. Kale, for all his cruelty, had nothing to fight for but spite. And spite was a weak shield against absolute love. Fenrir finally got his jaws around Kale's throat. He could have ended it then. But he remembered Elara's words about mercy and strength. He shifted back to his human form, pinning the massive black wolf beneath him. "You lose," Fenrir snarled, his voice raw with power. "Not because I am stronger, but because you are empty. Your name will be forgotten. Your blight will be cleansed from the earth. And I will rule for 1,000 years with her by my side." He did not kill Kale. Instead, he banished him. Fenrir's wolves drove him, broken and bleeding, back to his poisoned lands, with a warning: cross into the realm of light again, and the end would not be so merciful. That night, Fenrir stood with Elara on the castle battlements, looking out over their peaceful, sleeping forest. The rivalry was over. "He thought my love for you was a weakness," Fenrir murmured, pulling her close. Elara leaned into his strength, the warmth of her a stark contrast to the cold memory of Kale. "And what was it?" Fenrir looked down at her, his golden eyes soft only for her. It was the weapon he never saw coming. The battle was a cataclysm of snapping teeth and rending claws outside the castle walls. Elara watched from a window, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Fenrir was winning through sheer ferocity, but in a moment of distraction, a glance toward her window to ensure her safety, his rival sank fangs deep into his shoulder. A cry was torn from Elara's lips. It was that cry, filled not with fear for herself, but with fear for him, that unleashed something new in Fenrir. It was not the cold, ruthless rage of the Silver Terror. It was a hot, protective fury, forged in a new-found love. With a roar that shook the mountains, he broke his rival's hold and ended the challenge, not with mere victory, but with absolute, undeniable supremacy. He limped back to her, blood matting his silver fur. He shifted to his human form, grimacing in pain, and collapsed at the entrance. Elara didn't hesitate. She ran to him, her hands pressing against the wound, her tears falling onto his skin. She tended to him through the night, just as he had once done for her. As dawn broke, he looked up at her, his gaze stripped bare of all its ancient coldness. "You are my mate, Elara," he rasped. "The other half of my soul. But my world is one of tooth and claw. I cannot change its nature." Elara cupped his face, her touch gentle on the king of beasts. "I do not ask you to change your nature," she whispered. "Only to share it with me. You tried to give me a crown of jewels, but all I ever wanted was a place by your side. Not in your shadow, or locked in your tower, but with you." Fenrir, the ruthless, the terror of the woods, finally understood. Love was not a possession to be claimed, but a territory to be shared. He did not make her a werewolf. He did not need to. Instead, he made her his queen. The human girl who feared neither his man nor his beast. She tempered his ruthlessness with compassion, ruling not through fear alone, but through a balance of strength and mercy. The villages soon left offerings not of fear, but of respect, loaves of sweet bread, honey, and herbs for their queen. And on nights of the full moon, the great silver wolf no longer ran alone. By his side, a woman with sunlight in her hair and courage in her heart ran with him, her laughter a captivating melody weaving through his ancient, wild song, a perfect harmony of love and power.